Dany Hellz Kitchen, a Frenchman with a North African background, shares his story of growing up in Paris in the 80s and getting involved in the drug trade. Despite coming from a hardworking and honest family, Dany was drawn to the allure of the drug business due to the financial opportunities it presented. Dany's first foray into the drug trade was selling Moroccan hash on the beach in the west of France. He saw his friends dressing well and wanted to have the same lifestyle, so he started selling drugs to make money. He eventually expanded his operations to include cocaine, becoming one of the first in his neighborhood to bring it in. He describes his experiences in prison, both in France and in England. In French prisons, he found that the conditions were better than in English prisons, with more options for food and fewer restrictions. However, he also witnessed the mistreatment of inmates by prison staff. Dany then delves into his role as a diver in the drug trade, smuggling drugs underwater using a torpedo-shaped device. He explains the process of attaching the device to container boats in the Caribbean and then extracting it in Europe. He emphasizes the risks involved in this line of work and the potential consequences if caught. He also discusses the changing dynamics of the drug trade, noting that the business has become more difficult due to increased surveillance and technology. He explains that the price of cocaine has dropped significantly, making it less profitable for smugglers. Throughout the podcast, Dany reflects on his choices and the impact they had on his family. He acknowledges the stress and shame he brought upon his parents and expresses regret for the negative consequences of his actions. He also emphasizes that he is not promoting or glorifying the drug trade, but rather sharing his personal story. Dany continues by talking about the profitability of the drug trade, specifically focusing on the business of smuggling drugs such as weed and hash. He believes that the drug trade is a good business with high profits, especially if one can import hash from Morocco. He mentions that the price of drugs may drop slightly if they are legalized, but the demand will still be high, ensuring good profits. He also discusses the potential impact of legalization, particularly in Europe and the UK. Dany believes that weed and hash will be legalized in the next 5 years in the UK, but he doesn't think it will lead to a significant decrease in profits. He mentions that the market for Moroccan hash in England has declined, but the demand for weed remains high. Dany reflects on his personal experience in the drug trade and expresses his desire to move away from it. He acknowledges the stress and negative impact it had on his life, including strained family relationships and imprisonment. He emphasizes the importance of focusing on a different path and taking care of his son. The guest then shares details about his arrest and imprisonment. He explains that he was arrested by the police while he was at his mother's place, and they found evidence of his involvement in drug trafficking. He talks about the charges against him and the evidence the police had, including surveillance and wiretaps. He also mentions using encrypted phones for communication to avoid detection. Dany discusses the dangers he faced in the drug trade, including the potential for violence and the risk of losing large quantities of drugs. He mentions that his life was in danger due to the significant financial losses caused by losing drugs. However, he states that he preferred being in prison rather than being dead outside. The guest also talks about his involvement in the drug smuggling operation and why he chose to be hands-on rather than delegating tasks to others. He emphasizes the importance of trust and loyalty in the drug trade and how his reputation for honesty and loyalty helped him build connections. Dany shares how he made connections in Colombia through friends and acquaintances. He mentions that he traveled extensively and used his connections to establish relationships with people involved in the drug trade. He also discusses his recruitment process for divers and how he would contact experienced divers through their CVs. He talks about the trust he built with his connections and the importance of being humble and respectful in the drug trade. He mentions that he was well liked and trusted by others because of his honesty and loyalty. He also discusses the risks involved in the drug trade and the potential consequences of being caught. Dany reflects on his time in prison and how he made the best of his situation. He mentions starting an Instagram page called Dany Hellz Kitchen, where he shared his cooking skills and recipes. He talks about the therapeutic aspect of cooking in his prison cell and how it helped him cope with his time in prison. He also discusses the relationships he formed with women while in prison. He mentions using dating apps to meet women and how he would have sexual relationships during visits. He talks about the rules and regulations regarding visits and how people would smuggle various items into the prison. Dany acknowledges that many people in prison are involved in drug addiction and mentions the presence of heroin addicts. He talks about the role of drug addicts and the drug trade and how they would pay for drugs and services through their criminal activities. He also discusses the challenges and dangers he faced while in prison. He witnessed suicides, violent incidents, and even a throat-slitting incident. He also mentions the presence of rats and the poor hygiene in the prison. Despite these harsh conditions, Dany found ways to cope and make the most of his time. He used cooking as therapy, developed his social media presence, and focused on self-improvement through reading and exercise. When asked about his decision to make changes in his life, Dany explains that he doesn't necessarily see it as a conscious decision. He acknowledges that he cannot continue his previous criminal activities due to the risks and consequences involved. However, he doesn't express regret for his past actions and instead focuses on moving forward and living a different life. After his release from prison, Dany describes his initial experiences of freedom. He expresses gratitude for his family's support and talks about his travels and work in different countries. He mentions his desire to leave his criminal past behind and build a new life for himself. Dany also discusses his plans for the future, including setting up his own company, building a container house, and continuing his culinary pursuits.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe.